Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast, coming to you live from the massive studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. You know, we've been, as we looked at the evolution of the show, you know, we started a long time ago looking at converged infrastructure, and we were, you know, virtualization was taking off. Over that time, we obviously covered kind of all of the infrastructure as a service and some of the platform as a service things that have been going on. And then for anybody that's been following for the last year or so, lots and lots of talk about containers, platform as a service, some of the emerging technologies around things like Kubernetes and Mesos and Mesosphere and all those sort of things. And, you know, for a lot of people, sometimes this sounds like lots of different just technology, and does one replace the other, and what does it mean? Why did somebody invent this new thing? And so today we've got a really interesting guest, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce him, and then we'll kind of get into why we sort of grabbed him today. So excited to have Subbu Allamaraju on the show. Subbu's the chief engineer for cloud and platforms at eBay. So Subbu, welcome to the show.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
You know, we've been following you on Twitter for a while, kind of the stuff that you've been working on, and you had a blog post a week or so ago. It was called Lessons from the Cloud Bunker, and it talked about kind of the differences between, you know, kind of today's infrastructure and where, you know, the large cloud providers are going. And obviously, a lot of us follow the large cloud providers because the things that you guys work on, the problems that you figure out how to solve, eventually become, you know, palatable for, you know, sort of more mainstream people that want to either keep up or do similar things. So before we dive into that, tell us about your background, because you've got a very deep background from a lot of very well-known companies. So tell us not only about your background, but the kind of problems that you like to solve and work on.
Yeah, certainly. Prior to eBay, I was at Yahoo building some of the social platforms and web services. Prior to that, I was at BEA Systems, the WebLogic fame, building products for them. I think I joined eBay early 2011 and jumped into the infrastructure area in 2012. I think it's been a fantastic ride since then, where I had a opportunity to build some of the largest private cloud infrastructure for eBay. And prior to the split of eBay and PayPal, even PayPal, I had a chance to influence the direction and the scale out for the OpenStack Cloud.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I know, you know, obviously a lot of people follow what eBay's doing. You know, you guys are very active. Talk real quick before we jump into some of the experience that you wrote about. So you're based in Seattle. A lot of times people tend to think that the really big things happening in technology, whatever are happening in the Bay Area. Seattle's obviously, they had Microsoft for a long time, but there is a ton of cloud stuff going on in Seattle. What's the DNA and what's the community up there in that space, and why is there so much of a concentration around sort of modern cloud stuff?
I think this is this is one of the geekiest community around here. The talent is extremely high, even when compared to the Bay Area. In some respects, this area tends to attract much higher density and diversity of folks. Yep. I think that's why you see, you know, Kubernetes was done by engineers in Google in this area. Of course, AWS is there, Microsoft Azure. So I think Seattle has become the cloud capital, cloud mecca of the world.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it was the cloud city before because of rain, and now it's sort of the cloud city because of technology clouds.
Absolutely.
So the premise of the blog that you wrote, and we've got it in the show notes for anybody, you know, basically is built around this idea. And I'm going to throw out some terms because I've been around the industry for a long time. And when I first started hearing terms like ephemeral and immutable, you know, they're very computer sciencey sort of terms, but I'd never really heard them in the context of you know, products and some things. Give folks just a baseline of what it means when you start hearing things like ephemeral versus immutable as you're talking about infrastructure.
I think in the context of infrastructure, when I say ephemeral, it is something that dies. Let me take an example of my personal MacBook Pro, and I know it is ephemeral. Anytime its disk can fail, its network can fail. I know that, and as a user, I tend to treat it like a pet. I take care of it. I take backups every day and make sure it's so I can come back to that state. This is well and good, and I think in the context of large data centers, we see infrastructure failures happen a lot, and the premise that I want to get out is that you have to, when there's something ephemeral, something that fails, you have to treat it that way. You can't try to hold on to it. It goes back to the herds versus cattle analogy. So a cattle is ephemeral. It can be killed. It can go away in a second. I think in the context of the other word you used is sorry, what was it?
Immutable.
Immutable infrastructure. So immutable infrastructure, on the other hand, is about having something that you don't have to change its state. For example, oftentimes you bring up a software on a box, and you don't try to update it. You discard it. I think personally, I look at more disposability as a more interesting and useful concept than immutable, because if I can dispose of, I don't have to worry about changing state. That is, I don't have to worry about mutating it. I think we need to, as an industry, get to the point of disposability. I think once you get there, we can have much more resilient software applications across the globe.
Right. Now, I heard you were speaking at the OpenStack Seattle event a couple weeks ago, and you made a comment that forever people thought about infrastructure as it was hardware, it was servers and storage and networking, and now we have people talking about sort of software-defined data centers and software-defined. And you said people really need to start thinking about infrastructure not as a set of infrastructure or resource problems, but really treat it like you do software. And that stuck out to me but at the same time, I sort of went, boy, that's a big jump, because infrastructure people traditionally don't think about software in the application sense, if you will.
Yeah, let me actually go back to that's a very important question. I think let me go back to the blog post, and I talk about the provision, deploy, monitor, remediate closed loop. Let's take a look at each step. Provision by provision, I mean creating infrastructure, whether it's bringing up virtual machines, setting up their networks, getting storage, and so on. And today, I can do those things through APIs. So when I say I want to provision infrastructure, it's a matter of writing code to bring up that infrastructure in the state I want. The second part is deploying software. And as we know, we have been talking about infrastructure as code and automation. And you would deploy software using, again, software. I could use Puppet, I could use Chef, I could use something else. But that's, again, software. To deploy software, use software to deploy software applications on the infrastructure I provisioned. The next part is monitoring it. Again, monitoring is API driven. I get insights through a cloud provider's APIs or some other stuff I do from the operating system, from the application, or in fact, we have a large multi-tenant metrics collection platform, and that's again software. And then remediation. Remediation is the process of bringing this infrastructure back to the desired state when infrastructure fails. That is again using APIs, writing code. So I think in the past, industry has thought of these aspects as IT, where you file tickets, you get machines, and then somebody goes and deploys software, and goes on and on. I think that works well if you have a small organization, maybe with 10, 15 applications. But when you have thousands of applications that need to change every day, hundreds of times, you have to treat this as a software engineering problem. And I think, in fact, most of my team is software engineers, except maybe half a dozen who are extremely good at operating at scale and who are systems engineers.
Yep. Yeah. And, I think the two biggest things, so, reading through your paper and you talk about this PDMR, provision, deploy, monitor, and remediate cycle. I think the two biggest things that jump out at me, one is anytime people talk about automating things, they talk about automating things, config management, kind of, some of the principles that get talked about with DevOps is there's always a set of people that worry and they say, well, my job's going to go away or whatever I do. And one of the things that jumps out at me is, if you really think about what that job is, that job is essentially, doing all the things to do that provisioning, to do that deploying, and really you're shifting that manual work into, doing the work to turn that into software so that it becomes repeatable. That doesn't eliminate that person who did it. It just says, instead of you clicking on things every single time, we need you to basically, make it a consistent process so that, if you're doing it at 8 a.m. or you're doing it at 8 o'clock at night or 3 a.m, it's going to be consistent. I think there's an education opportunity that's out there for a lot of people that, these modern things that the big companies like eBay and Yahoo and others talk about is you're trying to solve a problem that isn't eliminate people. You're trying to solve a problem that is essentially people don't want downtime. People don't want, they don't want that. And that's really what those organizations are there for, get the applications out there. And then the operations teams are there to make sure they run all the time. And the only way to make that happen is to be very consistent with things.
Absolutely. I think it all goes back to the time to detect and time to recover. And when you're operating at scale, you can't reduce time to detect and time to recover unless you have fully automated the complete life cycle of your infrastructure.
Right. Well, I mean, it's the sort of classic troubleshooting problem. If you've ever answered the phone, in a call center and you've had to troubleshoot something, I mean, the first thing you do is you go, well, tell me what your environment looks like. And that's one thing if you work for an external entity that's troubleshooting somebody else's problem, like they're troubleshooting your MacBook. But if you work internal to that company, you should all the time know exactly what the environment is supposed to look like, and then you're baselining from that.
Actually, that's a great analogy. I think it's all about knowing the desired state and automating to take the infrastructure to that desired state.
Yep. Now, so you talk about these concepts of sort of durable and declarative. One of the things that's jumped out to me, and I've been spending some time sort of digging into things like Kubernetes and Mesos, and is they have this concept that says, I want the environment to look like this, whether it's called a pod or something like that. And then there's this, how many instances of that, or basically describing and declaring like, this is how big I want it, this is how fast I want it to run, I want it to be monitored, and if something fails, it goes away. I mean, are those concepts that are now in that technology, is that the core of what you mean when you say things should be durable and declarative?
Absolutely. I think the worldview has been changing as we learn how to deal with infrastructure in the last decade. The worldview, sorry, I hear some. It's one of my Skype or your Skype.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think maybe you mean it. Let me start again.
Yeah.
The worldview has changed in the last several years from a very imperative style of putting together infrastructure. If you look at the classic AWS style, where you have EC2 APIs and you have CloudWatch and then you have CloudFormation, and using these things you can sort of put together. Implement applications to put together this closed loop. I think that worldview has been changing over time to say that you really have to think of let the user declare the desired state and model the infrastructure from that desired state. So instead of asking how many VMs do you need, and hey, here are the 5 VMs and these are the IP addresses, instead you are saying how many cores, how much memory do you need, how many copies of that infrastructure do you want to run? So let me run that for you. That is the mind shift that's been happening in the industry, and that's why I think platforms like Kubernetes and Mesos are getting more and more interesting and useful, though we have to still make it to scale it for eBay scale. But
Sure.
The point being that the abstractions are getting out there.
Yeah.
So I think my dream is this: in a year or two from now, I don't want developers to say, "Hey, give me 5 VMs." Instead, I want them to say, "Hey, run my app. Take my app, make 10 copies, keep them running forever."
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, it's funny if you step back from it, there's lots of people who would say, hey, I'm an enterprise architect, or I've been an enterprise architect, for example. That was my job. And part of that was, yes, you were thinking through kind of how these big applications would go together, but part of it was simply going, well, let's size that. Let's have a sense of how do we match your business requirements, which might be, I think I'm going to have 1,000 requests a day or 1,000 requests an hour, to some sort of technical specification, so that, whatever that means in terms of a business request means this much in terms of technology. And people used to spend, days and weeks and months trying to plan that. But they had to do that because they were talking about, different kinds of hardware for storage and different kinds of stuff for compute. Well, now, the underlying platforms are very much the same. They're all basically variants of x86. And we can now basically model that business thing, that business mapping to technology mapping in software. And like you said, you can have an application owner just go, I want it to run like this. I want the experience to be like this. You figure out how to do that for me.
Exactly. I think that is the shift that is happening. And you're right that it does change the work some folks have to do in terms of skills and thinking. But I think that's the future.
Yeah. No, and, I think, when we start to think about how fast some of the technology is changing, how much people have expectations about, using the internet, using services on the internet, and then how hard it is sometimes to hire people, you put all those things together and you go, boy, we're going to have to figure out how to make these systems be, sort of, they're going to heal themselves because the software is smart enough to make that happen. And we're also going to be able to hopefully bridge that gap between what a business owner wants and the way that they speak about it to what the technology has to deliver under the covers.
Yes, I think I go back to an analogy I heard, from someone from HP a couple of years ago. It's all about shifting complexity around.
Yep.
I think the complexity is not going to disappear. It is there. Mm-hmm. It's how we are packaging it is changing from imperative procedural style models for infrastructure to declarative models of infrastructure.
Yep.
Its complexity is still there. Yep. It's just the way we model has been changing.
Yep. So, you've been actively involved with OpenStack for quite a while. You were part of some of the user committees. eBay's not shy about saying that, OpenStack is part of what you guys do. But you're also, obviously now active in what's going on around containers. What's your take on, not sort of like does one win and one loses or, whatever, but how is this, how is the transition going? Like, which of those types of tools fit for what you guys want to do? Which, what do you wish they were doing instead?
I think speaking of containers specifically, I think this revolution that started 2 years ago has been changing the developer experience. It's helping us. It's helping our developers package applications in a way that is portable. It's consistent and can be repeated, whether it's on dev or production. I think that part is for the best outcomes. I think the part that hasn't happened at scale yet is the aspect of using containers, putting together a declarative infrastructure. I think without that declarative infrastructure, the paradigms like Kubernetes or Mesos, containers themselves are not that interesting because you still have to worry about how do I make sure 10 containers are running all the time. And so you still need to worry about the declarative model of a running the application at desired state. I think, to me, that is the more interesting aspect. In fact, we have made a conscious decision early on saying, hey, containers are interesting and they're solving certain problems, but they're not taking us all the way. So let's not just go with containers. Let's think of it in the context of a cluster manager. Think of it in the context of, let's say, Kubernetes or Mesos, and then work end to end.
Yep.
So that the developer, whatever ships, the developer ships, and the developer says, this is the desired state for my application, and we take that and be able to run that, maintain the desired state in production.
Yeah. So I know sometimes people talk about, and I don't know if this is the right way to think about it or not. I mean, sometimes people want to talk about, do containers replace virtual machines? And I seem to be hearing more and more that people are kind of saying, well, maybe the way to think about it is you're going to have some system that's going to sort of manage your underlying infrastructure resources, and that might be something like an OpenStack, right? It's going to set up some VMs to, be resources, or it's going to set up, virtual storage, and then the container piece of it really should be more focused on application packaging, durable and declarative sort of environments for I mean, do you see that happen? I mean, is that where OpenStack kind of ends up, or what's the way to think about that?
I think two parts to that question. One is that the containers versus virtual machines versus something else. I think I don't think that is the right question to ask anymore, because I think someone from Red Hat, I think it was last year, one of their security gurus says container is nothing but a fancy way of running a process. That's all. I mean, you're spawning a process in a certain way using namespaces. That's pretty much it. I think what we figured out early on is that is not the interesting question. A lot of our developers don't care whether the underlying abstraction is a virtual machine or a bare metal. They don't care. All they say is that, hey, can I run this Docker in this desired state? That's what they care about. Mm-hmm. I think that coming to OpenStack specifically is that what we have seen evolve over the years is that it is an IaaS layer where I can get the building blocks to put together infrastructure, whether it's the compute, storage, network primitives. I think for that part, OpenStack has served us well. Of course, there is work to be done in terms of scale and availability and things like that. But
sure.
But I think OpenStack has done well in giving us the building blocks. I think containers and cluster management end up being a layer on top. Eventually, my hunch is that 2-3 years from now, as people get comfortable with declarative abstractions like Kubernetes and Mesos, they stop dealing with OpenStack directly. A provider would deal with IaaS like OpenStack, like I would deal with it, but my customers don't deal with OpenStack. Gotcha. I think that's how I see evolution happening in the coming years.
Gotcha. And when you say provider, because you mentioned that you don't necessarily mean always a public cloud provider like an Amazon. I mean, that could be you acting as the sort of internal provider to your company as well, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So one last question, because a lot of our listeners are always trying to figure out, like, okay, the stuff you guys talk about is very cool. The guests are working on cool stuff. How did you guys start exploring this space? So you think back 2 or 3 years from now, like the stuff was new, you wanted to start playing with it. Like, what if somebody came to you and said, I'm starting to use this, like what do you recommend to them to kind of get started to play around with it and learn it?
I think let me speak from my experience, our experience at eBay. eBay isn't really new for cloud infrastructure. We built we realized early on that automation is key.
Yep.
For rolling out software. I think what we realized 3-4 years ago is that we need some level of genericity so that there are APIs to do things, and that enabled us to automate a lot more things than we were doing before.
Okay.
Because we were solely focused on deploying certain kind of applications. With OpenStack, with IaaS thinking, we were able to let more workloads come to the cloud, because the APIs are there for anyone to put together their infrastructure. I think we approached from that angle. We approached from what building blocks do we need to give to our customers so that they can do their job?
Okay.
Instead of I, as a provider, being the bottleneck for through tickets or permissions and so on and so forth.
Got it.
I think self-service is the key principle that we started with, and that has helped us a lot.
Okay. So, if somebody was looking at this and it sounds to me like maybe the most basic thing somebody could figure out how to do is say, okay, if I wanted to offer a service to my end users, and the end users could be anybody. I mean, it could be a peer in your IT organization. Figure out how to say, how do I make that accessible via an API, or how do I make that accessible in a programmatic way? Start with anything. Start with something small. Start with anything. Get comfortable with how do you write that API or expose that API, and then you can start thinking about each individual task or combinations of tasks as sort of services that you can offer as a programmatic thing. Is that a fair way of thinking about it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Start thinking in terms of APIs. Give the APIs. In fact, our mission statement 3 years ago was give unfettered on-demand access to infrastructure.
Okay.
We started with that principle.
Yeah. So you start something big like that, and then it sort of forces you to, to think about how you'd actually get to it. So start with a big goal, and then take steps to get there. So, Well, very cool. Well, listen, I'm gonna wrap it up with that because I think we've covered a lot of things. And again, folks, more of this will make some sense if you go back and sort of read through the blog. Subbu, I know you're out and active in a lot of places. Where could people run into you at an event or something the rest of the year?
I'll be at the next OpenStack Summit in Tokyo.
Okay.
Yep. Hopefully
Great.
Some other conference later this year.
Okay. Excellent. And we'll have all of your contact information, your Twitter handle, and everything in the show notes. So, folks, if you liked what you heard from Subbu and you want to ask questions, hit him up. Buy him a drink in Tokyo if you're over there. And thank you very much for being on today. We really enjoyed it. For Aaron, who's out today but has been on a bunch of shows from LinuxCon, thank you for being on, and have a great weekend.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.